Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, and this is our third installment with our partnership with Material Handling Wholesaler. And this month, we are going to be talking to Phillip Brand. He is a sales trainer, and he is the author of Become a Warrior at Selling and also the author of A Warrior's Approach to Effective Sales Leadership. He has written the cover article for the August 2020 issue of Material Handling Wholesaler, which is entitled Sales Professionals Take Responsibility. And we're going to talk to Phillip about the article, talk to him a little bit about his books, and we're also going to talk to him about sales and leadership and his view on that and what the kind of current status is of selling and also leadership as well. So Phillip, welcome to the show. How are you?
Well, thanks for having me here, Kevin.
Definitely happy to have you on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about your background?
Well, Kevin, I've been in sales for over 30 years now. I have lived internationally as well as obviously here in Canada, and I have trained thousands of sales representatives coast to coast. And my most recent book, I'm now training more on the leadership level. It's interesting. More and more people come to my seminars and they're asking leadership questions. And that's the reason why I wrote the most recent book.
Gotcha. Okay. So you kind of gone from sales to, I guess, a leadership standpoint. Now, when reading the book and looking at the book, what can someone expect, I guess, from the book? And, how has the, I guess, transition from sales to leadership, or how is the synergy working there with sales and leadership?
Well, that's a great question, Kevin. The Become a Warrior at Selling was my initial book into sales, and we covered a lot of grounds. But what actually ended up happening, as I mentioned earlier, more and more people were asking questions about leadership. Mm-hmm. And actually, I was very surprised. I grew up in a leadership environment that you always put the customer and client first. You always put your representatives first. And if you treated them well, you would succeed. And this was a novel concept to many what I call managers. And I've really changed their philosophy to think more of a leader than as a manager.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that, you have a good point that, and I think you talk about in the article too, how it's becoming more and more important to be honest and have that integrity when you're doing sales, and becoming a leader to lead those sales to happen and just be there for the customers that are more informed now more than ever, because there's all different kinds of easily accessible sources of information. So, talk to us a little bit about, I guess, the honesty and integrity approach, and, why it's become so vital to have that legitimate reputation as not only a salesperson, but as a leader as well. And tell us a little bit about, what does that really mean, and how does it help?
Well, integrity has to be at the forefront here, Kevin. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between a customer and my vision than a client. A customer is somebody that you see once. A client is somebody that will be with you for the long haul. And a big portion of that has to do with trust and integrity. There's a lot of great salespeople out there. They can pull the wool over people's eyes. sell them a product. But you know what? Is that doing the client's best interest? More importantly, is that doing the representatives and the companies they represent best interest? The answer there is obviously no. So if you put integrity and honesty in everything you do, sometimes you may not make the sale, but that's okay. It will come back to you because you are putting your customers and clients' interest at the forefront.
Definitely, and I totally agree. I mean, I think that, you have a great point where you talk about the fact that, you can have a customer, or you could have a client for life, right? And it's all about your reputation and, how you deal with them and approach them. And if, like you said, if you're pulling the wool over their eyes, then eventually they're going to catch on to that. And at that point, then, they're not going to come back to you for business, or it's going to be very hard to get them to want to repeat business with you. And I think, like you said, being able to be honest and have that integrity, a lot depends on delivering on your commitment to your client or your customer. And, oftentimes the key to succeeding in sales, if you're honest and have that integrity, is ensuring that their product or service can be delivered when stated and given the expectation of the customer. So, with my background as distribution, oftentimes, we have sales who is committing something to a customer, and, we're having to make sure that that gets delivered, whatever that product may be that we're distributing. So, how does a company, and I guess how does a salesperson then, take the role of now making the sale, but then becoming a leader in terms of ensuring that, the company as a whole is working together to make sure that we're delivering on that commitment that the salesperson put out there?
Kevin, I like that you've used the word commitment. I've used it in all of my books.
Mm-hmm.
I have drilled down at what my definition of a commitment is. It's an irrevocable promise to yourself and your family. And what I mean by that is, if you have the integrity that you lay down the law and you're committed to it,
mm-hmm.
that will go forward for the rest of your life. Yes, we're talking about sales, and yes, we're talking about distribution. But no matter what your commitment is, if you stick by your guns, you're going to be gold for the rest of your life.
Definitely. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that, if you're able to commit to something and you're able to deliver on it and stick to it, like you said. And I think the important thing, too, there is the commitment. Oftentimes I've seen in my experience, some people where they'll commit to something, but then, the commitment doesn't happen, and then they'll kind of backstep, and they kind of start to lose the honesty and integrity that we talked about previously. And it definitely, it makes you kind of question that person. I think it's on both sides of the spectrum too, whereas, the customer is probably questioning, but then I think, the people that you work with are questioning as well, because, why are you making a certain commitment and, setting us up for failure and not really, helping us get to there. So I think that kind of speaks to the point of that salesperson then becoming the leader, making sure that, the sale goes end to end, not only just getting that commitment from the customer, but then delivering on the business's commitment to the customer as well. So I'm curious as well, you're using the term warrior. So obviously that's something that I think that is a theme that you're playing throughout with the sales and the leadership approach. Describe to us, I guess, what does a warrior mean to you?
A warrior is somebody, in my mind, is somebody who never, ever, ever gives up.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about commitment, but there's more than that. A warrior will do what is ever necessary to achieve their goals, make sure that their commitments are met, make sure that their company's commitments are met, and more importantly, they're the warrior there for their client. They'll go to bat for clients when things aren't going well, and that will drive clients to them longer and further. The warrior approach in all of my books really has the focus that, you're willing to go beyond any expectations.
Interesting. I like that. I think that's definitely a good word to use, and I think it's good because too, when you think about, I guess, salespeople going out there trying to trying to push business for the company they work for. I mean, they really are, kind of going to war, I guess, in a sense, for their company and their business. So I like that you kind of use that word there to describe leaders and sellers as well. So now I'm curious, from my background, I'm not really from a selling background. I'm more from the distribution side, right? Delivering the product for the salesperson. So, oftentimes like there's some friction, I guess you would say, between that person who's selling and then the person who's actually delivering the product, because, sometimes you have the case where the salesperson is kind of over-promising on what the company can really do. And you talk in the article a little bit about under-promising and over-delivering. And, obviously, it's kind of the old adage where you look at, being able to kind of under-promise and then, I guess, wow your customer by, over-delivering, as you mentioned in the article. So, how do you create a better relationship and understanding, I guess, between the salesperson and then the distribution people or the customer service people that are trying to support the commitment that the salesperson put out there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Kevin. The dynamics of organizations is absolutely key, and obviously communication has to be there as well.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to sales, one of the things that oftentimes people don't realize is sales is the lifeblood of all the industry. If there's no sales, there's no accounting, there's no distribution, there's absolutely nothing there. So the sales is at the forefront. Oftentimes on our side, we have our ego steps in and thinks we are better than everybody else. But more importantly, when there is a good relationship between the sales and the distribution, they work very well hand in hand. And this goes back to what we call professional selling. You said that, some salespeople will go out there and they'll overpromise and underdeliver. Unfortunately, those type of salespeople will, especially in today's economy, be long gone.
Mm-hmm.
Once you realize that the customer is key and you're giving them what is absolutely necessary, but again, being realistic with what can be delivered to them, going back to under promising and over delivering. Again, happy clients make happy business, which makes repeat business over and over and over again. But you're right, there has to be that constant communication, because if somebody drops the ball and the salesperson is the person who dropped it, they need to take that responsibility. If it happens to be on the delivery side, again, it has to be some responsibility there. So responsibility is key in all aspects. I drilled down on what makes sales representatives responsible, but there is responsibility throughout. And this starts really at the top as a leader. Going back to what's the difference between a manager and a leader. As a leader is somebody that will step outside the box and make sure that they are down getting dirty and making things happen, being really a mentor for everybody, versus a manager who's reached the peak and really forgot about everybody else who's really doing the hard work and is out there making sure that everybody is happy and working in a very concisive, well-oiled machine.
Definitely. I think you have a good point there too about the leadership, and as you're talking about, somebody moving up the ladder in a sense, right, and kind of getting complacent, I guess, in a sense of not taking responsibility for the people that they're actually leading, because a leader, I guess, is only good as the organization or the people that they're leading. So it's really important, I think, as you mentioned, to still be out there and making sure that what you're saying is going to happen is happening, and that you're following up and you're taking the responsibility for that, as well as holding those responsible who should be held responsible. And I'm curious though, what do you say, I guess, to the people that, because I think there's a point in when you're selling that you could just add maybe like one little extra thing in there, and maybe you feel like that'll seal the deal. But maybe it's something you're thinking like, oh well, I could say this, and then I'll just figure it out later if the customer wants to go forward. How do you, I guess, keep from doing that, but still be able to kind of push through and get that sale? Because, many times just adding in that little extra thing and thinking that we'll figure it out later now becomes like the over promising. How do you kind of deal with that?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Kevin, you're really drilling down what makes the difference between amateur and a professional salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
And it all comes really down to activity. And if you're very busy and you're taking things professional, you don't have to add in that extra just to make the sale. Because if you're seeing more than enough people, the sales will come. It's really a numbers game when it comes to sales.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't realize that. And they're sitting in front of somebody and they think, if I give them this and give them that, I'll end up with a client. Here's the downside. The clients don't respect you when you do that.
Right.
The clients will maybe buy today, but they won't buy tomorrow. Again, a difference between a customer and a client. A client's going to be your lifeblood. Saying no to a client, we can't do that. Or no, our delivery system is we're not going to be able to get it to you today. It's going to take an extra 48 hours or whatever they're asking for. They'll respect you. They'll appreciate that. And more importantly, they'll know that you're honest. And if you're honest and built with integrity, maybe they'll say, hey, I can get this somewhere else. But I will tell you, they will come back because that other person will overpromise and underdeliver, and they will be moving and looking for somebody else. In today's environment with technology, clients are more educated than ever before. So they know what they can actually ask for. And sometimes by asking for something, it's the bravado, hey, I'm going to get this extra.
Mm-hmm.
The unprofessional sales representative will give in. The professional will walk away and say, I'm sorry, we wish we could do some business. And I use the big 4-letter word, next. We'll go to the next prospect and see what we can do with them.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that approach. I think that's kind of having some self-control as well. And like as you said, it's the difference between an amateur and a professional. And a professional knows when to stop, knows when to control themselves, and knows when they have to move on, right? And that's something I actually talk about in the article. Move on, don't wallow. There's lots to do, right? So, one thing too you talk about here is you talk about not making the same mistake twice. And I think that's a really important thing because, oftentimes we say, as a leader or as someone just in general, it's okay to make a mistake in a sense, as long as you learn from that mistake, right? And that helps you to not make the same mistake twice. So how do you think, oftentimes when a leader makes a mistake or they take the wrong step, what do you think is the best way to approach that mistake instead of just, obviously resolving the mistake but how do you then take the approach of making sure it does not happen a second time? What's the right way to go about that?
We all have egos. And when we make mistakes, oftentimes we want to hide. We want to dwell on it. But if you let your ego go and you go to your mentor and say, look, I made a mistake. How do we fix it? There will be a solution. But more importantly, now you learn from that mistake and you never want to make the same mistake twice. And this is always done by flowing up. You always go to your mentors, your leaders. If you go down and you trickle down and you're, for example, a manager, and you start talking to your team, well, the distribution's doing this wrong, the distribution is doing that wrong, they're going to get a negative attitude because you flowed that down. You need to flow it up because, ironically, your managers, your leaders, your mentors, they've been through this. They've done it before. So how do you get away from it? You want to really pick the brains of your mentors on a regular basis. You want to keep educating yourself. I mentioned at the very start, I've been doing this for over 30 years. I'm still educating, still reading, still learning, still going to seminars, because you'll never, ever, ever get to the end of it. Why? Because you always want to improve. You always want to get better. But going back to the original question, you have to address it, that a mistake was made. You have to fix it at all possible. And then you have to learn and teach yourself. One of the things we teach a lot is self-critiquing. Just because a sales representative made a sale, it doesn't necessarily mean they did everything right. You have your sales process. So you have to self-critique and say, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? How can I improve myself? And if you say that on a regular basis, you'll only become your better self.
Definitely. I like that. I think that, it's really important that you mentioned that as well, because, like you said, you got to keep educating yourself. And I think you had a really interesting point there about, not pointing the finger in a sense, right? And that's part of what you talk about in terms of leaders taking responsibility. And like you said, if you keep, pointing on it's this person's fault, it's this person's fault, it's this person's fault, then everyone that you're leading, in a sense, gets that negative connotation about that person. And that's not necessarily what you want to happen. That shouldn't be really the result of the mistake. It should be, how do we move forward? How do we grow from this? And how do we prevent it from happening again? And maybe even how do we take this mistake and figure out how we now do this process or whatever it is that the mistake was based around? How do we do it even better than we've done it before? So I think it's a really good point. And now I'm curious, from a sales perspective and also from a leadership perspective, we've been going through this pandemic, COVID-19, coronavirus, I guess, period in time. How now do salespeople and I guess leaders in general, how do we get through this pandemic, and how do we, help our customers, but also help our business as well, continue to keep going? And how do we help to lead that business forward, and how do we keep our relationships with the customers going and keep business being generated?
Kevin, that is a loaded question because there's so much detail we can go through here.
Yeah.
But there's a few things I will point out. We've been in this pandemic for a while now, and the professionals out there have been itching to get going again, have been self-educating, have been trying to work on themselves. So when they are ready to go, they're going to be at the top notch. So what's going to happen? The clients and customers are aware of this. So the first thing you have to do, and hopefully everybody's been doing this along already, is you have to be in touch with your current existing clients. They need to be aware of what you can do with them during this time. How can you support them? When you come out of this pandemic, there's still going to be those customers that you're going to be able to help because they're going to need some instant needs as soon as they get back up and running. But ironically, there's going to be a lot of prospects out there that can be turned into clients. And there's reasons because they've actually looked at all their information and saying, you know what, we need to improve this, we need to improve that, we're paying too much for this, we're paying too much for that. Who should we be going to? And the professional steps up, and they're the ones that can help. We'll also look at their vendors and say, you know what, this company and this representative we're dealing with, he or she is not that good. Now's the time for them to go out there. The second thing you said is, how do businesses get better? Well, unfortunately, through this time, there's been many companies that have gone bankrupt, and there's some quality, not only sales representatives, but industry people out there. Everybody from logistics to accounting, everything is out there. So now's the time for you to say, as managers, leaders, owners, CEOs, hey, you know what? This person hasn't been doing that great. Maybe we need to replace them with a better person. Or maybe it's time for us to expand. We now have the quality out there that we can really start hiring right now and really take our company to the next level. During this pandemic, I've spoken to a lot of companies about increasing their sales reps, getting better quality sales reps. Because, Kevin, from your side is if more sales comes in, there's going to be more logistics people that's going to have to happen, more outbound that's going to have to happen, and the company can actually expand with a solid base. I'm very positive, obviously not from health-wise what's happening, but very positive with some industries out there moving forward. There's going to be some great companies built around this.
Definitely, yeah. And I think that's an interesting perspective where you said there are more prospects now probably. And I think it's very true, just from talking to people in my industry and distribution space and logistics, procurement teams have been kind of working overtime really because they're starting to look at, as business has died down for people, they're looking at how do we save money or how do we get better service for better money, or who is really willing to work with us right now and be flexible in terms of pricing or come up with some creative solution that, we can try and get through this and help to reduce our costs a little bit as our sales have been reduced. So I think, like you said, there's a lot of opportunity there for prospects, and there's a lot of opportunity for people to look at their offerings and maybe tweak them a little bit or be a little more flexible to kind of maintain that business through this time, this sort of down period, and then, kind of build that relationship and that foundation for a longer term relationship where services, will eventually increase and the need for purchasing more things will increase as business gets back to where it was prior. But like you said, I think there's also a lot of opportunity here where new businesses will be generated as well, because there's going to be new things needed. There's going to be demand for different things. Consumer behavior has certainly changed in a lot of ways. So, I've talked a lot about the pandemic on the podcast in previous episodes as well, but I think that, like you said, obviously the health portion is not a good part of this, but there is a lot of different changes happening in terms of economically and just opportunities in general for businesses as well. So I think that's really interesting point there that you have. So yeah, where can people find out more information about it's your training and your seminars and your books as well?
They can go to my website. It's very simple. It's my name, phillipbrand.ca.
.ca, because you're in Canada, right?
Because we're in Canada, that is correct. Even though I train internationally, my website is phillipbrand.ca.
Okay, great. And Phillip is the author of the August cover article for Material Handling Wholesaler. And you can check that out for more information at mhwmag.com. So, Phillip, thank you so much for coming on the show. We will post more information and a link to your website on thenewwarehouse.com as well. Thank you again.
And thanks for having me, Kevin.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.